All right, today we have Sam Miller Science on the Earn It All podcast. We're super pumped to talk to you about all things metabolism and alcohol and all the things that we typically help people with. But thank you for coming on, brother.
Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, where'd you fly in from?
I flew in from North Carolina.
North Carolina, and you're out here speaking at Bedros' event, huh?
I am actually visiting. So
Okay.
Bedros is a friend of mine and former mentor, and my friend Ali is going to be speaking at BK Live, and then have a couple podcasts out here as well. But definitely an event that's good to attend, and I like to go for the network, and you have some other friends there too, but commonly speak in that circle of people. So
because from what I've seen, as we are getting to know you coming on the podcast, I'm like, this guy should be speaking a lot of different places.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. Well, I'll be back for Silverback Summit in November.
Yeah,
so
okay, good.
That's the one where I'll be speaking at that one for the men's health event. So
awesome.
All very common. You'll see a lot of us kind of overlap at each other's events and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Well, dude, it's great to have someone like yourself on because, our coaching program is called Earn Your Booze. Our overall company is called Earn It All. But at the core of it is taking care of your health, because without our health, we have nothing. And I know you hear that a lot, and sometimes it's kind of overplayed, but it's like, no, it's a real thing. Like if you are not actively taking care of your physical health, it doesn't matter how strong you are in the mind. It doesn't matter how much money you have. Like if the body dies, everything else is gone. And you've been a leader in the fitness and health industry for almost like 2 decades now. And we wanted to have you on and just kind of nerd out a bit on metabolism and like what that even means and everything. And because I know you have so much to teach people that they don't even know about their own bodies. And I think that's one of the biggest revelations, like for me, especially like when we come into have a new group of people come into a coaching group, is like a lot of people don't even know the first step about what metabolism is, how their body actually processes protein and carbs and calories. And like they hear these things and maybe they've even tracked them, but they don't really know why. So I'd love to kind of uncover some of that myths, with you about how does the body actually function? Why is metabolism so important? And like, why do we need to pay so much attention to it?
For sure. So you can think of metabolism as basically a stress and energy regulator. So for any guy who's trying to get lean or optimize vitality, energy, optimize muscle and performance, we really need to consider how metabolism is basically playing into our overall success. And that's not just success in the gym, right? If you are metabolically unhealthy, it's going to show up in your life, in your ability to even perform optimally at your workplace. So it's cognitive function as well. Now, metabolism, if you were to just look it up in an encyclopedia definition, it's basically talking about bodily processes and reactions. But the reason we care from a health and fitness perspective is because of that stress and energy regulation. So basically you could think of that as external stress in our environment, also internal stress in our body. So that's everything from if we're not regulating our blood sugar, if we have poor gut health, all of those things can definitely play into overall body burden and impact our ability to transform the way that we want to in terms of our physique. The energy part is really where people tend to hyper-focus in health and fitness, and that's largely on calories. So you could think of calories as a unit of measurement for energy. So when we intake those calories, right, we have carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. So we have fats are 9 calories per gram, protein and carbohydrate going to be 4 calories per gram. Alcohol is kind of in the middle, around 7 calories per gram. And we'll talk a little bit later about how it's more than just the calories when we're consuming the alcohol, but the effects downstream of that alcohol. So when we're focused on metabolism, really what we need to consider is that stress and energy regulation piece, and how our exercise, our food choices, all of those things are going to play into how metabolically healthy we are.
So would you say that the metabolism is essentially the body's just operating system, how it operates?
Yeah, you could think of it as kind of like a governor, or in a less linear way than calories in and calories out. You could think of it as almost like a thermostat, right? Because it's going to regulate things in that way. So operating system's a great way to describe it, but there's kind of nuance to that operating system versus the metric ins and outs and inputs that people tend to think of.
For sure. And I know Adam has a ton on this topic as well. But a big takeaway already for me is it's such a complex system. It's not just, calories in, calories out. It's, you mentioned mental and stress and, DNA, genetics, like so many things go into it. Because I grew up, I was your typical hard gainer. I heard it all. It was like, oh man, you can eat, anything you want and never gain a pound. And I was like, well, I'm trying to gain a pound. I don't like that. To me, that was like being called fat, if I was a fat kid. But it's interesting that like people are so different like that. And is it really like that many different factors coming in, or how much is it like just genetically predisposed? You're going to be operating like this, and now all the other external factors, factor in.
So environment and lifestyle are definitely the trigger for the blueprint of your genetics. So the genetics is more the foundation, but how that plays out is largely going to be based on your childhood, early adult years, your overall health behaviors. So all of us sitting here, our metabolic health is almost like a fingerprint or identity that we've developed over the course of decades based on past decisions. So your choices do play a very large role. I think a lot of people like to point the finger at genetics. Now, are some people dealt different cards when it comes to their family history, maybe in terms of cardiovascular disease risk or certain longevity considerations that we need to be mindful of as we age? 100%. But I think if we're only focused on the genetic part, we're not taking personal responsibility for the elements we control. And again, at the end of the day, our habits, behaviors, choices, lifestyle, the way that we operate on a day-to-day basis impact that operating system, right? So we're not the victim of the operating system. We have the ability to influence it through our environment and basically the stimulus. So when you follow a training program, that's a stimulus for your metabolism. If you follow a particular nutrition program, food is basically prepackaged instructions for your metabolism. So as much as genetics are important, really what we care about is the expression of those genes, which is influenced by all of these behaviors that we're talking about.
Boom. I mean, yeah. That's why I think it's such a mystery for some people. Like, well, I'm just big boned. I'm fat. And it, like they have these, things in their mind that are just ingrained in them so much. But what you're saying is, I love that you said this, because he talks about his mother all the time, is like, it really does have a lot to do with how we're raised from 100%. A very young age. And, both of our parents, our mothers especially, were like very on the health train. His mother was decades beforehand. She was like cutting out seed oils and all this stuff like a long time ago, before it was like a cool thing,
Yeah. I didn't have processed sugar till I was 14.
Oh, wow.
And she beat my ass for it too. Sorry, Mom.
What was it? The candy bars?
That was a Dr. Pepper.
Oh,
yeah. Man. I had a Dr. Pepper at my friend's house, and it was like the craziest thing I ever put in my body, and I was hooked and it's so crazy. I immediately got addicted to it, and then I was like hiding it, and I would use my change to buy candy at the store, and I didn't even know anything about sugar or anything like that beforehand. We had meat, fruit, vegetables, and like honey, and vegetables out of the garden, like fruit from the tree outside, and I drank a Dr. Pepper at my friend's house, and it was from about 14 till I was about 21. I was massively addicted to sugar. And it just shows you like how much your environment and how much your habits and all that stuff, how much that actually has an impact on you. Because I had to combat those years from 14 to about 21. I had to combat that for the next 5 to 7 years. I was seeing the negative effects of what I was doing, but it wasn't immediate. It was the next 5 to 7 years.
But a lot of folks have the opposite, which is that their parents are unhealthy, not providing the healthy choices. And even, for example, if the pregnant woman is actually insulin resistant, or she's headed towards metabolic syndrome, or has prediabetes or diabetes, it does drastically increase the risk of the child having similar health complications in life. But again, part of that is going to be the mother's behavior that's impacting, obviously her food choices are impacting her metabolic health. The metabolic health impacts the baby. And then again, what type of environment is that child being brought into? If someone's already heading towards obesity as a result of their habits and health behaviors, it's much more likely that the child's going to progress down that road very quickly. So 100%, there is still a hereditary component, and even just the basics of how healthy was your mom when she carried you, to basically your birth. But aside from that, we still have to be thinking, okay, in childhood, and we know there's so many important developmental things that go on, the development of the microbiome and the immune system, all of that happens at a very early age, which is why now there's so much concern around endocrine disrupting chemicals in our environment and things that kids are exposed to at a very young age. So all of that does play a role. However, you still have kind of that blueprint. And then if we think about it, like naturally, if your parents are eating healthier and they're teaching you how to eat healthy and you're making good choices, you have the ability to regulate your appetite and you're less likely to overeat versus someone who starts off down the path of these very hypercaloric, not very nutrient dense foods. Very, very hard to regulate your appetite. Like you said, it was about 14 to 21.
Yeah.
You start changing your preferences in terms of your palate. Those foods are a lot easier to overeat and overindulge than those single ingredient whole foods that you were eating where it was, protein, fruit. It's a lot harder to now. Is it possible? It probably is possible to still get an abundance of calories from those foods, but it's certainly easier to go crush, a box of cereal and Dr. Pepper or something that's like a, very, very, very calorically dense serving of food. So
Yeah.
I think all of that plays into the picture, and then how you were raised in your household then kind of sets the stage and primes your adult decisions as well in terms of what you perceive to be normal versus then like being healthy and eating, good quality foods becomes the weird thing. And so then it's this huge like behavior shift.
Yeah. So let's talk to the people then that you accurately, this is most people's problem. Let's talk to the people that were not set up for health success when they were younger. And they're however old they are now. They're 20, 30, 40, whatever. And they're finally like, man, I need to get my shit together. Like this is when people usually sign up for a program, which is great, because they can get expert advice, accountability, consistency, and all that stuff. But I think a lot of people still, though, especially if they got a really bad start, they're like, man, how can I even break this curse? Like, I've been this way my whole life, and I've been fat my whole life. And it's like, can I really change it? So how much like at that point is, your genetic kind of just makeup at that point? Like your metabolism is kind of just used to running a certain way. Like, what does it really take like on the inside to switch that over to operate differently forever now?
Yeah. So the good news is that we played a role in that happening. As much as it's terrible to kind of face yourself, look at yourself in the mirror and say, this is what it's come to, and this is how I feel, and this is what I look like.
Yeah.
The same sort of responsibility that you had in getting you where you are can also get you out of it, right? So that means like your choices led to this current situation, which also means your choices can get you out. It may be harder now that you're metabolically unhealthy. We have dysregulated hunger signals. When you're insulin resistant, you have a hard time regulating your blood sugar, your appetite. When you accumulate body fat, it actually sends signals. Basically, from a metabolic perspective, it's going to impact your perceived sort of hunger and cravings that you have. And then also being insulin resistant or having more body fat can lower your predicted energy expenditure. So basically, instead of that like predicted TDEE that most people have in terms of the calories out side of calories in and calories out, usually we see that they have a lower than predicted TDEE, which means sometimes they have to go lower with those calories than you would think for their size to actually lose weight. Now, that's not necessarily true for all individuals. It is dependent on how they're currently eating, what that macronutrient distribution looks like, the amount of muscle mass that they have. But the good news is that as much as you got yourself into this situation, you can get yourself out. It doesn't mean that's going to be easy, but it won't take as long as it did to get to where you are. So let's say you've spent the last 12 years paving this path of being metabolically unhealthy. You don't need to spend 12 years to get healthy. You might even be shocked at what you can accomplish in 12 months. Now, it might not happen in 12 days, and it may not happen in 12 weeks, but you can make some massive strides in a fraction of the time that it took to actually get you to where you are in terms of your status quo right now.
Yeah.
So that's super powerful. And even on that shorter time frame, is the scale exactly where you want it to be? We can move in that direction. Are your photos and how you look in the mirror or how your clothes fit? It may not be perfect after 12 weeks, but the good news is in terms of your internal health, your labs and overall biomarkers can change very favorably, even in the first initial amount of body fat that you lose. So simply eating healthier, starting to exercise, getting a little bit of that body fat off, we can actually see pretty significant changes in terms of someone's overall like serum lab markers, which are very important in terms of overall health and longevity. So you may not look the part just yet, right? But we're still, and it's very hard too, right? Think of like a roll of paper towels. You take, basically a paper towel off and then another one and then another one. You don't really notice that the paper towel roll is getting towards the bottom until you get very, very close to the bottom, right? The first few layers of paper towels, it's not that noticeable. But as we progress and as we're consistent, it will show up over time. So it's not necessarily going to be a lifetime endeavor to get back in shape or take another decade, but you will need to be consistent with it. And that's the hardest part, especially when it feels like your body's almost fighting that process because of the metabolic status quo that you've created.
There's a really good example. Recently, there's a influencer, YouTube influencer that has been off YouTube for 2 years. His name is Avocado. I don't know if you know who that is. He was the mukbang guy where he just eat a bunch of food, and he, famously got insanely obese over a period of like 5 or 6 years. Or no, I think it was 10 years. It was like he first started making the videos, and then 10 years later, and this was 2 years ago, he was enormous. Disappeared for 2 years. He came back just recently, a couple days ago, and he had lost 200 pounds, and he was like trolling everybody. He's like, you guys thought I was fat. Like, so I think it's a good example of like, yeah, it took him 10 years to get there. It only took him 2 years to get rid of 200 pounds, regardless of how he did it, whatever. But, I really like the paper towel roll, example that you gave, because it's especially I've been working with clients for the last probably 15 years, and it's so hard for them when they're not seeing the result. And it's like between 60 and 80 days is when they first start to see a little bit. And it's like, you got to get them to that point first. And I think using that as an example, the paper towel roll, it's like, listen, we're taking one sheet at a time off, one sheet at a time.
And then that positive feedback loop almost then leads to more of that behavior that we want when they start seeing a result. And that's also why I like health testing, though, is because if we can look at some non-scale victories and also things like your energy levels. So aside from health testing and lab testing, another thing I used to do with all clients is I have this method that I use in check-ins. Everyone wants to get lean. They usually want to lose body fat. So this acronym, it's called SHREDS, stands for sleep, hunger, recovery, energy, digestion, and stress. And so we're going to check in on those 6 things aside from your scale weight, because everyone hyper fixates on their scale weight. But if you're sleeping better, your energy levels are better, your recovery from the gym is better, if your digestion's better, and your stress seems lower or manageable or about the same, we're probably moving in the right direction. So a lot of times the scale is a lagging indicator. And so let's say you're not in the best physical shape from a fitness perspective, but maybe you've made progress in your career or you've built a business. There's always these lagging indicators of success, right? So the work that you do now may not show up for 60 days, 90 days, 120 days, sometimes years, right? Sometimes 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And you think it's an overnight success. In reality, it's years of work in the making that have led to that moment. And so I think if clients have other sort of positive feedback loops in their life and other signs to look for, and that's part of the role of a good coach, is showing someone the victories, showing someone the wins along the way, aside from just the client getting super fixated on the scale when maybe their body composition is improving or they're actually setting PRs in the gym and getting stronger. And if they just stay consistent with that over time, they would actually be on the right path in terms of their overall health.
And honestly, I think one of my favorite things to look at, especially for myself, is to go even farther down that route is the internal data.
Yeah.
Because I totally agree, especially if someone's trying to lose weight. You want to see it come off. You want to see the belt size go down. You want the different size shirt. And that's super important to get that mental win, keep it going. But I love that you're just reassuring everybody here that you're actually getting healthier too. As long as you're doing it the right way. Of course, you can do a crash diet and a cut and a bunch of drugs and all that. That's not going to work. That's not going to be healthy. You'll see that on the blood work too. But we talk about blood work all the time. And I wanted to dive a little bit more into that because I used to be an aerospace engineer in fighter jets. And literally everything that we did was black and white. It was all data, all data driven. Like we needed to know exactly every little system in that jet before you send it in the air to know if it was safe. It's a flying stealth supercomputer weapon with a human life on it. Like you need to know if it's going to work, or at least know what what some potential issues are, mitigate them, fix them, stuff like that. Right. The body's the same way. We can see so much inside like the blood work, what's going on with real health that you cannot see in the mirror. It doesn't matter how skinny you are, how fit you are. Like there's people that look amazing that are ready to drop dead because they don't know what's going on internally. So how important is it for the average person, let's say, to start doing their blood work? Do you think they need to be getting on some sort of program? Or I tend to think people should just know their data regardless of how they're training or eating.
Yeah, this is multifaceted. So I think the issue is in the fitness space, sometimes it's undervalued, and then therefore clients or people who are in their own physical fitness journey or transformation, they also undervalue the data.
Yeah.
And what's happening is in health and fitness, if you're only looking at calories, sets and reps, or macros, sets and reps, and you're not looking at the internal data, you're basically looking at all of these different sort of toggles or stimulus that impact your internal health, AKA physiology, but you don't actually understand what's going on inside, right? So it's like, I'm changing my food, I'm changing my exercise, but how did that actually show up in terms of my health?
Right.
So having labs or health testing is one of the most powerful tools you can use for having an idea of, oh, this training program is actually working quite well for me in terms of my response in XYZ area. Or maybe I actually overdid it because I've seen some unfavorable changes in terms of my testosterone, my thyroid, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Same thing with nutrition. Maybe you're in a season where you're trying to build some muscle, so you're eating slightly more, but maybe we actually go and look at your metabolic health and we see things like your insulin levels, A1C, glucose, those might be shifting in a certain direction. It might give us indication to go into kind of a different mode or a different season with our nutrition. So I'm 100% on the same page. I love, and it's actually one of the main things I teach is actually helping health and fitness professionals better understand that data to use it for clients so that we're not flying blind, to use the aerospace example. It's like so many people are flying blind because they don't actually have the data with their internal health. And just because you're healthy, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't get this testing. If anything, get a healthy baseline now before something goes wrong. As you mentioned, right, we can correct if we have that almost like that assessment that we can go in and say, okay, this is off, this is skewed. When I felt my best, it was, you know, X, Y, and Z. And now we've got this deviation from that. Well, now I have an idea of, okay, I felt really good over here. What do I need to do to get back to that? And if you're someone who's in your 20s or in your 30s, it may not seem like the most imperative thing for you right now. But as someone who has two aging parents, both who have some form of either chronic disease or illness or health complication, I can tell you, you're going to want that data. And whether it's because you want to look good in the mirror or just you want to live a long and healthy life and be around for your kids or your grandkids, you can't undervalue that internal health data. And there, no time is too soon to get it. And most people should probably be getting that data once a year minimum, maybe even every 6 months. And if you're on any type of program in terms of medication from your doctor or hormone optimization, you may even initially in that program or protocol need to do it every 3 to 6 months to make sure that you're actually in a good place with it. Because that's another issue in our industry right now is people basically like taking all these things, but they're not doing any follow-up lab testing to make sure that they're actually in a healthy range. So if you are healthy, you're in your 20s and 30s, it's not too early to get that information. That gives you a strong foundation, and you know your risk factors too. Like you mentioned genetics earlier or certain hereditary predispositions. There's no way you're going to know that you have, if you don't run any tests, how are you going to know that you have a potential problem? So that was something I did very early, knowing that on my dad's side, we have a family history of cardiovascular disease. So I'm going to do some extra testing in that area. I'm not only going to look at cholesterol and triglycerides. I went out and sought out extra tests basically as soon as I turned 30 years old, because I knew, hey, this is actually something that's a huge risk for me. And I need to make sure that even though I exercise and quote unquote eat healthy, how is my body actually responding to that? And have I offset my risk? Or my relative and absolute risk as a result of those behaviors.
Especially for us guys. I mean, 70+% of us are going to have some sort of heart complication. That's just the data, right? I think it's more than that actually. But most of us are going to die from either cancer or heart disease. Like that's just the way it is. And, I just turned 36 and I started getting testing on my heart done. And because it's like, they don't call it the silent killer for nothing, and it's not just, like you said, it's not just cholesterol. That's a misunderstood thing. And we can go down that rabbit hole, but it's not just your cholesterol. It's not just these singular things. It's a full picture. So just was talking about that recently on social media about what tests to look for if you're a guy, what to actually ask your doctor for and stuff like that. And it's not just your lipid panel and, what's your blood pressure. I'm like, yeah, that's super important, but also maybe we need to look at, further things, maybe C-reactive protein, maybe there's a couple other tests that we can do. So Yeah.
Yeah, what you get from your doctor at a primary care. So most of the time, if you go in for a physical and you don't have any health issues, it's actually very rare that you will get very comprehensive lab work.
Yeah.
And if you do get lab work, oftentimes it's missing a lot of key health indicators. And usually there's not much in the way of hormones, which are basically chemical messengers as part of this metabolic health that we're talking about. So if you don't, it would be like someone asking you about your communication, but you can't check your messages. Like you can't check your DMs, your Instagram, your WhatsApp, your text, your email, your Slack. Like you're basically like, you have no idea of the notifications. You don't know how many messages you have, but people are asking you like, what's in the inbox? It doesn't make any sense. So you need to be able to actually peel those layers back and go into that. Most physicians are typically starting you off with a CBC and CMP, which is just a blood count metabolic panel, maybe lipids and triglycerides, which is just a very, very surface level understanding of your health. We actually want to go, several layers beyond that so that you can look at that risk. And the CRP that he mentioned is basically just an inflammatory marker that we can check in the body as a way to gauge some of those risk factors in terms of our metabolic health. And, even for that cardiovascular risk and potentially even cancer risk as well, because we know that lifestyle plays such a huge role in the development of those conditions and diseases.
Absolutely. And then on the next, moving into the blood work piece, you're talking about just your regular doctor, regular general practitioner or whatever. You go in, they're going to give you these really basic blood tests. And then a lot of the times what happens is, and I've seen this a ton of times, is the doctor is just going to go off of the reference range from the lab. And it's like, a lot of these reference ranges are from they're just arbitrary numbers thrown out there. One of the famous ones, testosterone being an example, it's like, Quest Diagnostics will say it's 281 to 900. And it's like, well, that's a pretty fucking big reference range. So if you're at 282, you're totally fine, which is what basically happened to me in my 20s. I had hypogonadism from a brain injury in my 20s, and I was at a 186 and my doctor was telling me I was totally fine. And I was like, I don't feel fine though.
Yeah. I had a concussion as well. So I kind of had that conversation too. It's interesting how that works. But it's not only that, but it's not just total testosterone, but also free testosterone as well. Great person to chat about that. I know you guys have Allie coming on the podcast, but she's great for men's health in that department. And, testosterone, same thing for thyroid, same thing for insulin. The reference range of what's actually acceptable in Western medicine is kind of crazy. Like you could be borderline pre-diabetic and you're still in like the reference range. Hey, you're not dying. Come back in 6 months. Cool. I don't want to die in 6 months. So and that's not to say there are some really great physicians out there. So I'm not saying that all doctors won't order this lab work. Some will, but I always like the joke. There's a Chris Rock joke about pilots, right? It's like, you can't just say like, American Airlines can't be like, oh, we just had a few bad apples, right? Like you're going to like fall out of the sky. It's like with doctors, you want the best level of care, especially when it's something as precious as human life. So if you're not necessarily getting that test, you may need to advocate for either a second opinion or a referral to a specialist, or you may need to even seek things out on your own. And that can be really powerful. So I definitely agree. Hormones are definitely one area where even if people go in and they ask, hey, I want to check my testosterone. Well, what about free testosterone, right? Not just total testosterone. Or they'll go in and say, hey, my energy's been lower. I'm having a hard time losing weight. And they'll ask for thyroid and they only get TSH, which is actually just the stimulating hormone that goes from your brain to your thyroid. It's not actually the thyroid output and the metabolically active free T3. So even sometimes when patients think that they're doing the right thing and then they're trying to advocate, they're trying to communicate to these doctors, they're still getting very minimal data. And also part of it is just a result of the Western medicine standard of care and what insurance-based medicine will cover. So you may need to seek out, a comprehensive panel of your own. That doesn't mean you need to do that super robust panel every single time. You can just spot check things that you need to follow up on. Maybe you're just doing that every year or so, or every couple of years, but it's better than not doing it at all. And then in the in-between, maybe your individual health risks and maybe your predispositions to things or what you're working on. Maybe previously you were overweight and you've been really working on getting that weight off and better managing your blood sugar and your hunger and all those things. For you, that might be slightly different than the hard gainer or the person who's super lean, who's trying to build muscle in the healthiest way possible. And maybe or someone who had a head injury who previously had low testosterone. Those are going to be very different clients who all need slightly different sort of special attention in those areas.
For sure. And this is what we tell people, especially when it comes to hormones. Like we've talked about the family MD, they're going to do whatever they do. But if you want especially help with the hormones, we always say go to a specialist. But then a lot of times people go to a TRT clinic thinking it's a specialist, not knowing they're just there to sling TRT to everyone.
Here's
in the
200
world.
milligrams of testosterone, a milligram of anastrozole. Talk to us in 6 months.
You're done, So I think because this happens to a lot of people, like, all right, cool, I'm going to go. But where do I go? What do I do? I think it's really important to really understand what you're looking for and go into somebody that it can be hard to kind of know who to trust, but I like to go just to the highest level. I like to go to specialist. If I'm going to go to see about my heart, I want to go to heart specialist. If I have a concern about my testosterone, I go to a hormone specialist, And so just try to always go to the bigger, better, thing, in my opinion, for whatever you're working on. Because it's so easy to get lost in the weeds with just a general doctor, or just you get TRT and you can come back and check your blood work if you want, and that happens a lot these days. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of TRT clinics just disguised as real MD clinics, and that's just not the case, unfortunately.
I would agree. There's definitely a lot of cookie cutter programs out there. So it's important that there's a level of individualization. And with any physician relationship or even a coach, like this is true for anyone in a health profession, and that standard should be applied to doctors, physicians, nurses, really anyone who's has your health in their hands. Same thing with a health and fitness coach. We want to look for the level of individualization. What kind of questions do they ask you? How much do they actually try to learn about you before giving you that program? Right. If it's just like age, height, weight, and you're done, and they don't ask about your health history or how you eat or what your training program looks like, that's not exactly the customization that we would want. So that could be a nutrition coach, that could be a personal trainer, that could be a hormone specialist. Even the best cardiologists that I know will actually ask you things about your sleep and your lifestyle. What's your stress like? What kind of job do you have? How have you been exercising for the last 5 to 10 years? Those are all important considerations for someone to get to know you, and having some nuance in their answers. Like, it depends versus having this one size fits all for everyone. Yep. And that's where we run into trouble, especially with TRT and other medications and controlled substances, is when everybody ends up on the same regimen or program. Yeah. But we all have a different history in terms of our health and how we got to where we are. And we all have different levels. Like my levels aren't your levels. So we should kind of approach that with a level of care and caution.
Yeah. I like what you said there about it depends, right? And that's my answer. Basically, when I'm answering any question that anybody ever has to me about nutrition or health or anything, is preface it with, well, it depends. And it depends because, like you said, your situation isn't the same as your situation. And, the way that you've been training might be different than what we need to do. And like, there's so many different factors in there, and there's so much nuance in it that, there's so much cookie cutter in the health and fitness space that we're doing a massive disservice to the clientele, because what they need is even a little bit of actual care and actual, personalization based on what they're really doing and what they really need, and that's been an issue of mine since I taught at National Personal Training Institute years ago. And I taught trainers, I almost every course that they had, but one of my biggest issues with the trainers was like, you have to actually care about your client. And that's the thing that's, this space, and I'm sure you've seen it too, this space is missing that now, especially with marketing and with, I could make a PDF, get a badass funnel and make a ton of money on it. And all I'm doing is pushing this one PDF to everybody, and it's not really doing any good. It's actually, jading people away from the space. And so I really like that you said that about the nuance where it really does depend.
And genuine curiosity goes a long way as a coach or health professional. Just getting curious about your clients and understanding what they're going through can really help you design that program. And where I struggle with as much as it is very responsible to say it depends, I think where clients get confused is they're like, well, I need some general principles to take action on. So don't get us wrong. There's still, a framework of things that most successful people do with their health and fitness, right? They're probably exercising consistently. They're going to bed at a certain time. They have good sleep hygiene. They're getting outside and going for walks. There's basically a simple sort of ingredients list. Now, what we're talking about is like the serving size of the recipe, or is it a quarter cup of this ingredient or a tablespoon? That's really what's getting kind of adjusted for the person. There's general principles like strength training that we could all agree that most people, if not all people, given their physical capabilities, should be strength training and doing some form of basic movement, non-exercise activity as well in their lifestyle. So yes, 100%. There's some basic ingredients that everyone can follow for health and fitness. Don't overcomplicate that. You know, like with nutrition, we probably agree, eating, you know, foods with minimal ingredients and higher protein and micronutrients, all of those things. But then we can dial in the dose for the person. And that's going to be important depending on someone's health history, body size, activity level, all of those things, and what's actually sustainable for that person where they can be consistent. Because if it's not, then we're going to run into that situation we talked about earlier, which is they're falling off the wagon and they're looking at this uphill battle, thinking it's going to take them the rest of their entire life to get their health back.
Yeah, adherence is, I mean, it's everything. Like if you can give somebody a perfect plan, but if they can't do it, if it's something that they can't and or won't incorporate into their lifestyle because they like to live their life in a certain way. And you know, that's we run into this a lot with the Earn Your Booze brand, where it's like, I know, and I build programs and strategies and nutrition plans and things for people who still want to have an old fashioned on Friday night. So I run into this a lot where it's like, I don't want to change this part of my lifestyle. How do we maximize my health and with this? When a lot of other people are just like, well, you have to stop doing that. And it's like, or whatever, insert whatever lifestyle factor you want, right? And that's where the adherence comes in. And adherence is so important. And, I've seen some of the most massive transformations in clients who haven't gone, a black and white direction with it, who haven't cut something completely out, who haven't gotten rid of their oatmeal in the morning, even though I don't like oatmeal. Like, so it's like there's a lot of nuance to it. So I'm glad there's other guys out there that feel the same way.
And speaking of oatmeal, that kind of sets up my next big question here. I wanted to ask you about the importance of our gut, because it's overlooked a lot. A lot of people, even on a program, they're looking at their macros that they're eating, and they're eating better quality foods, hopefully, and stuff like that. But they still might be eating stuff that's upsetting their whole freaking system. And I think people don't know or realize how important our gut health is, and how a lot of like the things that we feel, even with lethargy or bad sleep or digestion, all these things could be coming from our gut. And it's probably something we're doing that could be very easily fixed. A lot of the times it's coming from something we're eating that we refuse to stop eating, or we just don't know we shouldn't be eating it for our gut. So tell us about like your theory when it comes to the gut, like when it comes to testing, if there's certain foods you think people should eat, or like just tell us about the gut.
So the gut's definitely important when it comes to managing your metabolic health and also energy levels, like you mentioned, quality of sleep. GI disturbances can often lead to sleep disturbances and vice versa. Like poor sleep will negatively impact your gut health, and poor gut health will negatively impact your sleep. It's a vicious cycle. Yeah. But one of my key pillars in terms of managing metabolism and metabolic health that I talk about in Metabolism Made Simple is maximizing absorption. So that's a combination of, basically assimilating those foods that we're eating. And what happens is when people are not necessarily eating those high quality foods that we mentioned earlier, or they are basically relying on a lot of snack foods, or they're not preparing a lot of meals at home, or maybe they are drinking in excess, all of those things can impact our metabolism and our energy levels. But what's happening in the gut is we have a couple main things tend to go wrong in individuals when they're having gut issues. There's the motility portion, which is basically the movement of that waste through the gut and then leading to your bowel movement. So when that's off, if things are too slow, they're staying in the gut, they're fermenting there. That's not supposed to happen, right? We're supposed to excrete that, and maintaining that motility is important. So most people should be going every day. And typically that's like 1 to 3 times per day. If you're going less than 3 times per week, that's usually defined clinically as constipation. So that's one piece. Intestinal permeability, you might have heard this online as leaky gut. That's basically going over your gut barrier function and the mucosal lining of the gut. So if you have the gut and basically you have our tight junctions here, if I were to kind of separate my hands like this, and things that are supposed to stay in the gut get into circulation, we're actually activating the immune system. And so this is where we can see a combination of, hey, my gut health is poor, but now it's actually impacting my full body systems and other hormones. and levels of systemic inflammation as a result of that intestinal permeability. Now, I do think in some cases on some social media accounts, leaky gut is sometimes overblown in the way that it's presented. However, intestinal permeability does exist, and there is research and evidence to support that it exists and it can impact our health. I think just sometimes the way people sensationalize it for marketing purposes is kind of in poor taste.
I think I know
So
exactly what
that's yeah, that's one piece. I'm not going to tear anybody down. So the intestinal permeability part is important, and then we have basically gut dysbiosis. So gut dysbiosis is basically levels of good and bad bacteria in the gut. So when you have an overgrowth of opportunistic bacteria, or what people would consider to be the bad bugs, that's where gut dysbiosis comes into play. So it's basically just an imbalance in the microbiome. We want commensal bacteria, that's the good stuff, and generally that opportunistic bacteria, those are going to be situations where we have that overgrowth. And that could be as a result of the foods that we're eating, high stress, and also things like low stomach acid. So the gut actually relies on stomach acid to help maintain that microbiome balance. And so there's a couple things that I mentioned earlier that are going to come into play to have a recipe for poor gut health is if you have slow motility. And this is also folks sometimes who drink and aren't eating good quality, nutritious foods and having enough fiber and water. If they have basically slow to no bowel movements, and then they have low stomach acid as a result of high stress, maybe abusing caffeine and other potential compounds. If we have lower stomach acid and things aren't moving through the gut, that basically creates a recipe for those overgrowths. So then the dysbiosis gets worse. So a lot of people have what's called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. That's very problematic in terms of not only you're not going to look great because you might have bloat or distension, you're not going to smell great.
Is that a candida overgrowth?
So candida is actually different and sometimes slightly more complicated than small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. The prevalence of that sometimes is basically it's classified under IBS in Western medicine. IBS is basically this big umbrella term. And usually you hear more about small intestinal bacterial overgrowth on like the functional health side of things or functional nutrition, although it is something that has been studied in research and evidence in like gastroenterology journals. But the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is just a form or kind of category of dysbiosis. Whereas candida would fall into more of like a fungal family or infection. Now, all of those situations, whether it's different infections or there's also H. pylori, but without getting too far into the weeds of gut health, I'd say the most important thing for people to understand is monitoring that motility, the quality of their bowel movements, and then also making sure that we're picking good foods that are feeding that gut microbiome in such a way that optimizes our health. That means getting good quality micronutrients, which micronutrients have a symbiotic relationship with the gut microbiome. So having good sources of vitamins and minerals enhances the health of the gut, but having good quality gut health enhances the absorption of the food and the vitamins and minerals. So again, this is kind of where the vicious cycle happens is people end up, high stress, low sleep, high caffeine, maybe some alcohol thrown in, not the best food choices all the time. And then maybe all of a sudden that starts to impact, are we going to the bathroom like we should? And that seems like a basic thing. And people are like, well, how does that play into my weight loss? Well, I'll tell you how that impacts your weight loss, right? So now when the gut health is basically compromised, it's going to impact your thyroid function. It's going to probably further impact sleep, sometimes can even play into what's going on with blood sugar regulation for folks. So the gut is really a center of inflammation and a key component of our health. So as much as someone might think, oh, well, I just didn't poop today, right? That's actually like not a good sign. So while some of these aspects have been disconnected from fat loss for such a long period of time and body composition, they're actually an integral part of the conversation. So with gut health, just remember maximizing absorption is a key part of managing your metabolism. And then when we're looking at sort of successful ingredients or kind of that recipe for gut health, we want to keep an eye on our motility. We want to make sure that we're not at either extreme in terms of our bowel movements, right? You want well-formed bowel movements. If you want to Google Bristol stool chart, I didn't make it up, but that's a good way to just kind of keep an eye on things, right? So if you need to, you can check that out. If someone's like, I have no idea what that looks like. My mom and dad never taught me. So that's one way to check that out. But motility is big. You wouldn't necessarily self-assess intestinal permeability or gut dysbiosis, but if you start to have symptoms like bloating, if you have distension, early fullness at meals, foul smelling gas, like you start to all of a sudden have some GI symptoms, that's a good indication. Or if you're maybe having a lot of skin issues and things like that, can point point towards some gut issues as well. So that would be, without turning into a whole gut focused podcast, because I know you guys want to talk a little bit about alcohol as well. Gut health is important for your fat loss and your metabolic health. And I think people don't always underscore its importance for physique change. A lot of times they think it's this like woo woo fluffy health thing that doesn't, like, oh, they're in two different arenas, but actually they are connected. And some people, just improving their gut health, the way they look in the mirror improves actually rather quickly. And the way your pants or your dress size, that overall fit of your clothes is entirely different when you start to remedy that. And even things like how puffy your face is, or you feel like you're retaining water, a lot of that can tie back to our internal health.
Yeah, you painted the picture very clearly how easy it is for people to do 4, 5, 6 things that are damaging the gut health. And you're getting poor sleep, you're having a lot of caffeine, you're stressed out, you have a little bit of alcohol, you don't make a lot of good food choices. That's most people.
Yeah.
Right.
Most people are stressed out and drinking caffeine and having some alcohol and eating like shit. And it's very easy to see why the health of the country is so poor,
right?
Because most people do exactly what you just said. And it does lead me to one of my big questions for you is, like, in that scenario right there, or in anyone's scenario, like, how is alcohol affecting the gut? Because if you think about all the things we eat, like I can have water or juice, coffee, they all have different pH levels, acidity levels, and all these things. But then you put alcohol in, you can do a lot with alcohol. You can take paint off of tables. It's a very corrosive thing, and it's a strong thing. So I can't help but think, well, how is the gut handling that? Because I see what it does if you leave it under skin or, anywhere else. What is the gut doing when somebody drinks alcohol?
So I think it's important to look at alcohol in kind of a multifaceted, multi-spectrum impact on health. Yes, it's going to impact your gut health, but I think a lot of people think either too much about gut health, or what we see a lot, and we were talking about this before we hit record for the podcast today, was actually in terms of a lot of people place a lot of emphasis on the calories from alcohol.
Yeah.
But there's a few ways that alcohol is going to impact your health and subsequently the gut. But a big aspect of it, aside from the calories, is sleep quality. So instantly out of the gate, consuming alcohol can often lead to deviations in body temperature, typically elevating that body temperature. Part of getting a good night's rest is, staying cooler. So if you think about it just from more of an ancestral perspective, it'd be cooler at night, right? The sun goes down and it's less hot. So if you're at home, having a cooler ambient temperature can help. That's also why there's now popular companies that have cooling mattress pads, because staying cool helps to enhance that sleep quality and sometimes sleep quantity as well. So alcohol is raising body temperature. It's also depleting key micronutrients. So things like in men, zinc is very important for fertility, for testosterone levels, and it's just an essential mineral that we need for optimal function in daily life. It also plays a role in terms of your immune system. So if you're getting sick a lot from the time that we're recording this podcast until it airs through back to school season, winter time, like cold and flu season, you need zinc, right? And so many people are actually running a zinc deficiency, partially because of poor food choices, alcohol consumption, and in some cases, they also have poor gut health. On top of the calories, the poor sleep, and the micronutrient depletion, we also tend to crave and eat pretty crappy foods when we consume alcohol. So not only is alcohol a toxin, and yes, it's going to impact everything that we talked about in terms of the gut, but what's happening there is, like, you're more likely to overeat. Most people, it's like the equivalent of the alcohol munchies as a result of drinking. There's also that inhibition in terms of your decision making. How much easier is it to go on your phone and order a pizza or go grab a burger or eat whatever's in your pantry if you've had a couple drinks, versus if you're someone who's sober and you're consciously making that decision about the food, right? It's not even the same taste or feel when you're going through that process. So it's not just the calories of the alcohol, it's actually the food calories that we often consume in excess of the alcohol. That doesn't mean that the alcohol calories don't count. They do, but it's that it leads to that additional change in behavior and the inhibitions to basically order more, eat more, and continue to eat, right? Versus having those normal kind of decision-making abilities around our food choices. So just to kind of sum that up, biggest things I see in terms of alcohol would be sleep quality, which when we have poor sleep, that's negatively impacting the gut. The impaired micronutrient status, that's going to impact the gut, but also our overall health and metabolism. then the change in food choice, typically we're not exactly choosing those gut friendly foods when we've been drinking a lot. So now that's going to impact the gut, but also think about the caloric excess. I mean, some people are consuming more after a night of drinking than their daily allotted calories that they would have if they were actually trying to follow a nutrition program or enter any type of calorie deficit for fat loss. So it's not just the calories, but it's kind of calories plus all of these other things that we're talking about. And are you going to want to get up and go do your workout the next day after you've had all of those drinks and ate all of that shitty food? No, probably not. So being able to then moderate your consumption in one area is now bleeding into your choices in other areas, because it makes it harder to do the healthier habits that we know we should be doing. So now it's this ripple effect, kind of this domino into other areas. Now you're not exercising. Well, guess what? That impacts your gut health too, and your metabolism. So
And
now
your
we've, and your sleep, and the calories part, because now you're not burning as many calories because you're probably hanging out on the couch because you got a headache from the night before. So it really is multifaceted. It's not just the, oh, alcohol has 7 calories per gram or alcohol is a toxin. It's really this multifaceted impact in terms of our health. And it's not, again, if you have clients who are consuming in moderation, or it's something where it is a bit more strategic, can some people do that? Yes. But I also think there's a subset of the population that would benefit from cutting it out for a period of time. Or if they do have a lot of gut issues, I will say removing alcohol for maybe 8 to 12 weeks can really help to improve the gut symptoms faster. You know, if someone's continuing to drink, it does make it a little more challenging to, just from what I've seen anecdotal, I didn't like run a randomized control trial on this, but just working with clients over the years, the people who were able to either moderate or abstain that consumption really did have a faster overall trajectory in terms of those health improvements. And then they could go at it with a clean slate in terms of, what do I want my life and lifestyle and food and drink to look like now that I've gotten to this place of optimal health? And sometimes they actually change their mind because they're like, I've never felt this good before. My energy levels are so much better. I'm not as anxious or depressed, and I'm not going to alcohol as basically a coping mechanism for all of these other things in my life. And so that can be powerful. So obviously, to each their own. I'm not here to judge anyone in terms of their decisions or choices about it, but to say that there's not an impact on our health would be irresponsible of me and misleading. So I think we have to be aware and then make an informed decision based on what your goals are. And I think there are some accounts that try to just make it like, oh, just fit it into your macros, it's fine. But be aware of those other health implications and then decide what's best for you.
You very eloquently, in different terms, restated our mission statement, essentially. Because a lot of the times when people come in, we do that with most clients, is they will abstain for 6, 12, 18 weeks, whatever period that we deem necessary, right? With them, as working with them. So I love that that's the page that you're on. Coming back to your book, I want to talk about your book a little bit. And because in this entire conversation, something I noticed going through your social media and stuff like that, you have a very inherent way of simply putting something, right? Taking something that is insanely complicated like metabolism and putting it into terms that everybody can understand. I'm currently writing a book right now in this space. I'm writing a book on epigenetics, which, on the same level of complexity as metabolism. How difficult was it how long did it take you to write the book? Tell me about the book.
Yeah, so the book was interesting in how it kind of came about, but I'd say, so I think the journey of the book started with something as basic as like writing captions and writing emails and writing blogs. So I'd been doing newsletters, posts, videos, podcasts. Really, the origin of the book was probably my podcast, which was like circa 2019. The actual deliberate outlining and writing of the book was like spring 2021. It was published, I want to say, November 1st, 2022. So I made pretty good progress with it. I was trying to keep it in this in the name of being digestible and also being something that people would actually read. I did try to keep it under like that 220 page range, because you find that people kind of don't even want to open it, or they check out if it's actually too long. So that process pretty much spanned a good chunk of 2021. And then a lot of what you're doing. So in 2022, edits, revisions, citations, modifications, rewriting certain chapters, going back through the edits that were there. So the book writing process was definitely something that, to me, was interesting. It was a great parallel to your health and fitness because, and to almost an extreme, because with a book, it's the ultimate test of delayed gratification because you don't actually see, I mean, you see the words on the page, but you have no positive feedback for months because most of the time, even your editors, even the people who are working with you on the book, they don't want to see stuff until like a chapter's finished or maybe even multiple chapters, or they're just going to edit it maybe like a batch approach depending on your work. They don't want to edit every paragraph you write every single day. So you're sitting down day after day after day, and you're making these daily deposits into this thing that is supposed to be a book one day.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like your health and fitness. You show up to the gym, maybe you don't see the changes, or you start eating healthy and you don't see the changes. And so it's really the compound effect of your efforts over a long period of time. And so it was interesting as I didn't really realize that initially when I started the book, but the further I got into it, I had a greater appreciation for how much it resembles a health and fitness journey. So the book was interesting. Parallel. And then it also did kind of speed up because I wasn't putting as much pressure on myself to write like 5 chapters a day. I became more obsessed with, I need to show up today, and whatever I do, I'm going to write something, but it's also okay if I don't write like 3 chapters today. I just need to write something and get it out. And the more that I just had that structure and consistency, it led to actually more prolific writing in the process. Fortunately, having podcasts on topics, previous captions, like I had some ideas and prompts and ways I like to teach things. And I've also been working with coaches and teaching and mentoring in the space for quite some time. Plus, over the years, I've seen how clients respond to explanations to where I know, okay, this worked for this client over here, Joe, and Jane actually understood this. This really clicked for her when I explained it that way. She had a light bulb moment about this topic. So I try to remember the stories that I would tell and the analogies that I would use to really hone in on the delivery of the topic. And I think something that people get caught up on, whether it's with writing or social media, is they're so worried about being perceived as smart or sounding smart, or that they have this great thing to say, when in reality, obviously, people with a great amount of wisdom have an ability to simplify things. Yeah. And so once I placed the emphasis on the end user and the recipient of the book, instead of how I was perceived, it actually made the delivery of the information a lot easier. And one of my mentors kind of always speaks about that in terms of whether it's this podcast or public speaking or writing a book, if you can shift your intention to thinking about the other person, thinking about someone you can deliver the message to versus making it about yourself, all of a sudden we've now taken a bit of pressure off of us. And at the same time, it makes it less about your own ego. Because if I'm worried about your reaction, I'm not thinking about the listeners, right? No. If I'm like, oh, does he like me? Like, oh, did he think I was smart today? Well, that's not actually going to lead to your best performance, because you're actually so concerned about what this person thinks that you're never going to actually rise to your maximum capability or your ability to deliver that message. So the book was kind of these layers of where I was like, oh, this is actually really about consistency. Oh, this is actually really about taking those stories of how my clients perceive this and packaging it in a way where other people could benefit from that message. And when it became more about that and just making sure like, hey, this is my ability to leave this mark on this industry. And no matter what happens, like, people have read this book, their lives, their communities, their families are better for it, you know, because Jeff Bezos gets like equally as much of the book as I do. Yeah. Right. So it's not like, that's not my like get rich quick scheme. So the book was definitely, as it became more of a storytelling mechanism and teaching mechanism and leveraging other aspects of my career, it really started to flow a lot easier. So I'd say for you, instead of worrying about impressing geneticists, think about, how could I help my clients and my family? Or is there someone in your life? I noticed your phone background, right? So if you have a daughter,
that's a niece.
A niece. Okay. So if you have a niece, maybe think about, hey, a few years from now, or when she's an adult, if she were to read this, what would this teach her about her health? And sometimes if you focus in on that person that you need to talk to, and you can share it from a place of care and love, it just comes out different.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Because if I'm worried about the PhD who's like in a lot, talking about genetic, not that I respect that career path, and I think they have a different way of sharing their message. 100%. But depending on who you're writing for, we really have to be able to hone that in. Yeah. Otherwise, it comes across that way. That's really the only way. I
threw the first 3 chapters away because of that. I was like, man, this is not digestible. It's not going to be, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to ask you about your book, because and you had mentioned in the notes that that process of writing that, right? And it's like, I have one a smaller book published about men's development and stuff like that, and it was the process is so crazy to go through. And I actually really love that you made the parallel between writing and health, because you're absolutely right. It's such a delayed gratification, and then also such a, a spotlight back on yourself on like, okay, take the ego out of it. And how would the end user like that? I thank you for that nugget.
And
That's
I'm not
amazing.
perfect with that,
Yeah.
right? It's like I have to remind myself. So when I was
Yeah.
sharing it with the listeners, I'm also talking to myself. It's something
Sure.
I still have to do when I post content or when
Yeah.
I hit record on a podcast. And you can tell when you're hyper fixated on doing it for the wrong reasons. And so it's just a helpful reframe that we probably all need, whether it's audio, whether it's video, whether it's writing, even getting on something, or even in a basic conversation, right? It's very easy to shift away from that, because as humans, like, we care about how we're perceived, and it's scary to put yourself out there.
Right.
So you almost have to give yourself that singularity of focus, otherwise it can be overwhelming. So I'm not perfect at it. It's something that I learned over time, and
Yeah.
I still struggle with it from time to time, but it's just a helpful little reframe that can bring you back and kind of ground you when you're in that creative process.
That's great.
Dude, I love it. So tell me about Metabolism School, because you've been schooling us
I
for the past
appreciate it,
hour,
man.
which is great.
So Metabolism School is a live program that we created for health, fitness, nutrition professionals. We do also have some health providers who are shifting their career back to health and wellness coaching. And the main focus there is to provide a live environment and essentially more like mentorship, apprenticeship, or school. If you look at any sort of craft or profession over the years, like, you wouldn't want someone to come and like be an electrician on your house and have no like real world experience in terms of doing that.
Right.
But with health and fitness, we look to these basically pieces of paper, like a printed piece of paper, and the commoditization of education as like the gold standard for someone's ability level in health and fitness. So we're more so bringing them through a combination of a mentorship process and giving them exposure to cases that they're going to see in the real world, largely related to this grand topic of metabolism that we talked about today, but specifically focusing on nutrition, things like your hormones, gut health, and other areas of health optimization that people often miss, and going beyond just the conventional calories and macros. So when I talk about the program, I say, hey, we're bridging the gap between macros, metabolism, and medicine, because if you look at anyone out there right now, the experience they're having with their doctor, 45 to 55% of millennials distrust pharmaceutical companies, and many of them don't have a primary care physician. So we're not even getting the care we need over here. And then health and fitness coaches hold their clipboard, count reps, and use a calculator to determine calories or macros. And that's not necessarily giving someone really the comprehensive picture of health. So what our aim is inside the industry is really to help health professionals take more of a 360-degree view of someone's health and solve those complex cases that a lot of times as a fitness coach keeps you up at night. Like, you feel bad that like Deborah hasn't lost the 15 pounds of fat that she wanted to lose when she hired you. You actually, if you're a good coach who cares, you have some level of guilt when people aren't seeing those results. And so we combine more advanced coaching techniques, tools, and systems to help these coaches, along with the use of health testing, to really give these professionals a better career, but also better client outcomes as well. So we talk a lot about results, retention, and referrals, because that's really the way that a health coach should grow their business versus, so much of what we see in the Instagram, like sensationalized influencer culture, is like people think that it has to just be this like clickbait thing, or I have to be, have like 1 million followers to be successful with my health and fitness business. When in reality, people can make a profound impact on their communities and their client base simply through having those more advanced tools. So we're really, the name of the game for us is that expertise and helping people actually be world class at what they do. And we've been doing that for quite some time now. Started off as just, I noticed my health and fitness clients were gradually becoming coaches. And I was like, hey, maybe this is actually something that we need to pursue. And so it started off more as like my little incubator. And it's now grown to a point where we're an accredited program and have that credential in addition to the mentorship component. So
that's awesome.
If you want to learn more about that, that's at metabolismschool.com. But I know you guys have a lot of like regular listeners. So I do think like my book is probably a much better, more digestible place to start if people were looking into that. But I appreciate you asking about the business as well.
Well, I think it's super cool because, like you said, dude, a lot of people in the fitness industry, they're selling their courses and their programs by showing their cars and watches. And it's like, No, I thought you were trying to get people healthy, you know. So I love the approach you're taking with real science, you know, real heart to help.
There was
you
a
know,
little bit
monitor
of
them.
like abs and ass in there too.
Well,
It's
yeah,
like
of
cars,
course.
watches, like
Of
a little
course,
bit.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's part of the
Just a
fun of the
dash, sprinkle.
part of the fun of the industry,
Yeah,
you know. But
for sure.
dude, Sam, keep up the great work, man, and thank you for sharing all this stuff with us. I learned a lot. And I picked up a lot from you. And I really like that you're out there really helping coaches level up their game to ultimately help more people. Because that's, I think, all of our combined goal here is just to create more and more healthy, capable, confident people. And we need more people like you to help create better leaders. So,
Well, I
thanks for what
appreciate
you're
you
doing.
guys having me and great questions today. I really enjoyed the conversation with you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you, brother. See you soon.